Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true killer encounter horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. When I was a little kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, we had this neighbor like a grandma to me. I'd go over and have snacks, and she had a Mr. Potato Head that I played with that was her now adult son's toy. Weird core memories. He came home in his 20s from the army, I think. I don't remember much about him, but he asked about taking my older brothers camping, but my mom said no. She had a weird feeling about him. Side note, we lived out in the country, not even a town, just a place. There were no locked doors. Everyone trusted each other. My mom saw him at our little store with bee stings all over and was concerned. He said he got them at the creek. She thought that was weird because that's just not a thing where we went all the time. But okay. A little while later, not quite sure how long, the news said that there was a murder of some campers out past where we lived. They had no leads. People were shocked. This doesn't happen here. My mom remembered her weird feeling and the bee stings that didn't make sense. She called the police to say, hey, probably nothing, but here's what I got. I remember detectives coming to our house to talk to her. They had some other evidence that matched, but not enough to link him to the murder. A couple with their child. It's unsolved to this day, though the detectives said that he knew that it was him. A few years later, the guy went to prison for an abduction/attempted murder of a woman who ran out of gas and he offered her a ride. She lived, thank God. My college girlfriend called me one night. The Baton Rouge serial killer had been active for a while, and she was being followed all over town, and even after going in circles, by a white truck, which the killer supposedly drove. She fit the victim profile. She was brunette, living in, house sitting for her aunt, a wealthy neighborhood. My roommate and I drove over, and we filed in line behind her in the truck. She lived essentially on the LSU grounds, so I assumed it was a stupid student prank or something. She parks at her aunt's house. Truck stops one house short of her aunt's, and we pull in behind her. I explain that I'm going to go defuse the situation. Walk over to the truck. The FBI says the killer is a white guy. This man is African American. Explain that no one is upset, but he's freaking out my girlfriend. He needs to leave. He looks side-eyed at me and drives off. I see the guy again a few months later, on the cover of the Baton Rouge paper. He's been arrested. He was the killer. My brother was dating the love of his life up until a few years ago. They met because they both worked in a restaurant. He was a piano player. She was a waitress. Things were going amazingly between them. The only problem was she had a jealous ex. He knew when they left work and what shift they'd work since it was the same thing each week. He decided for whatever reason that he was going to teach my brother a lesson for dating his ex, and planned to attack him with a Stanley knife when he left work one evening. That night, my brother and his partner were getting ready to leave, and he stopped for a second to talk to a colleague. meaning she left first. As soon as he stepped out the door, he slashed her throat and then ran. She died in front of him. That attack was meant for my brother. He's gone through a lot of therapy and down some very dark paths since then, but is finally coming out of the other side of it. But it's terrifying how close I came to losing my little brother, and how much he lost as a consequence, because of some deranged nut job. If I could get my hands on that guy, I'd get locked up myself. But he's in prison for a long time, and so far, he's staying there. This is more disturbing than scary, but in my neighborhood there was an elementary school teacher for the elementary school that I went to. Apparently one day he became very angry, very early in the morning, and he chased his wife out onto the lawn, executed her with a shotgun, then shot himself. All while I assume kids were headed to school. My mom answered the door to a young guy who was scared to death. He was crying and couldn't contain himself and asked to use a phone. Cops were called, and this is where we find out what had happened. He apparently was taken hostage and tied up in his basement, and one of his parents was murdered beside of him. He got away when they left and ran to the first house with the lights on. A man in my city dressed up as Santa on Christmas Day and slaughtered his entire family, killed his ex-wife, their 2 teenagers, his wife's sister, his brother-in-law, his niece, and then himself. Apparently he was having huge financial problems, and the stress on his marriage made him snap. Just Google Grapevine, Texas Christmas murders if you don't believe me. It really was very sad. There was a homeless couple staying in the woods. Out of nowhere, this guy showed up and started attacking them with an axe. They tried fleeing, but he caught and killed the boyfriend. The girlfriend made it to a nearby Walmart parking lot to call for help. As she called 911, she saw the killer walk out of the woods with the bloody axe. He just stood there at the edge of the clearing staring at her, before returning to the woods. Thankfully, they caught him. But honestly, could you imagine if they didn't? My parents went to the same high school in the late 80s, early 90s. A guy a year or 2 younger than my mom was suspended, and as a result, being kicked out of his house. He broke into a local sheriff's house to steal a gun, showed up to the school to say goodbye to his girlfriend, before heading out on the road to who knows where. The assistant principal approached him in the cafeteria during lunch and told him to leave immediately. He turned around and fired a round directly into the assistant principal's head. My dad was skipping school that day, but my mom and aunt were there when it happened. The whole cafeteria froze for a second. Then the kids started firing at students and all hell broke loose. In the end, he injured 3 students and surrendered quietly when the police arrived. My mom acts like the shooting never happened, and my aunt doesn't like to talk about it. This is a terrifying but true story that I experienced when I was 12. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area except for the family that my dad was friends with. It was a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple of years older than me, 12 at the time, and we got to know each other a little over a couple of years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details, and to be honest, I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. Hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. One night, a husband and wife were in their first floor condo, sound asleep in their bedroom. The wife heard a noise that was loud enough to wake her up. She thought at first that it was just one of those noises and was probably nothing. Nevertheless, she lay very still and listened carefully to see if it was anything. Sure enough, she heard someone going through their condo. She shook her husband awake and immediately put her fingers to her lips when he woke up. She whispered to him that someone was in the condo. The husband crawls out of bed and goes out to the living room and shouts, "I know you're in here, so just get out." The intruder doesn't leave, but instead comes at the husband and begins to fight him. The husband is very strong. He has a physical job and has very powerful hands. Still, the intruder goes round and round with the husband and won't stop. The husband continues to try to convince the intruder to leave. He won't. The wife is still in the bedroom with 911 on the line at this point. The husband finally gets the intruder in a chokehold, feels the breath going out of the guy, knows that if he continues, he will strangle the intruder. Husband doesn't want to kill anyone, so he starts to ease up on his neck. Once the intruder feels his breath coming back, he reaches into his boot, pulls out his knife, and stabs the husband in the chest. The intruder runs into the bedroom where the wife is, grabs her purse, and takes off. Husband comes back into the bedroom and is completely gray with blood squirting out of his hands as he clutches his chest. 911 gets there shortly after and rushes the husband to the hospital, where emergency surgery takes place right away. Turns out, the intruder hit the husband's lung, and he almost died. Kill or be killed. This story is about me and my husband. I worked as a house cleaner in Minneapolis for most of 2019. One of my clients was a mom with 2 kids. They lived in an old house that they kept pretty tidy, but I always got a sad, run-down feeling when I did my cleans. I think that it was mostly due to being an old, creaky house that I'm sure that many people had lived in over the years. but it also had the look of being hastily furnished and mismatched. Secondhand goods. The mom was very mild-mannered and soft-spoken. She had a quiet confidence about her that just seemed like a gentle soul. Most of the times I cleaned, she was in her room on work calls, but occasionally I was left in the house alone. Her boys had Pokemon bed sheets and so many books strewn about their room. I didn't interact with the boys much, but they seemed like goofy, normal kids with a caring, hardworking mom. During one clean, I was tidying up their living room, which had a desk in it. The desk was covered in papers, and I decided to stack them so that I could dust off the table. The papers on top of the pile were from the woman's lawyer, detailing finalized divorce proceedings. I didn't read much further, but did learn that she was now separated from her husband. I left the cleaning company that fall and moved on to other work, eventually leaving Minneapolis in fall of 2020 to move in with my parents in Virginia. That December, I got an email message from a therapist that I regularly saw back in Minneapolis, whose mailing list I'd forgotten to unsubscribe from. She said that she was taking time off of work as the boyfriend of her child had been shot and murdered. She included a link to a database for people who had been the victims of gun violence in the Twin Cities. My morbid curiosity got the best of me, and I started scrolling through and reading about the people listed. About 20 minutes in, after clicking to the next page, I was startled to see pictures of the woman that I used to clean for, as well as pictures of her 2 children. I Googled her name and learned that in early December of 2019, her ex-husband had come to her house to pick up the boys as usual. But this time, he brought a gun. The kids ran out to meet him, excited for their time together, and then realized he was armed and tried to run away. He shot both boys in the front yard, multiple times in the middle of the day, in front of neighbors. He then went inside and shot and stabbed their mom, before shooting and unaliving himself. He allegedly left a note, but it has not been publicly released. I cannot claim to have really known this woman and her kids, but it is a strange feeling to be intimately familiar with a family's home and belongings, and to then learn they all had been murdered at said home by someone so closely linked to them. Suffice it to say that I've spent a lot of time learning about their murder, reading about family annihilation, and trying to understand how people can get to the point where they feel that that is the right and necessary thing to do. I wish her family as much peace as possible to feel after something so incomprehensible and violent. Back when I had just been enrolled into school as a kid, all the way till we were in Standard 4, our school had a music teacher who was just this wonderful lady with such a pleasant, calming, soothing demeanor and voice. She was a wonderful music teacher, and thanks to her, I had taken up a great passion in music since school. She was in her 40s, but was most probably single, we thought. It is important to mention that in my country, women are still ashamed and looked down upon if they choose to stay unmarried post their 40s. Also, for some reason, most of our teachers were married and would talk about family and would try to convince the single teachers to find someone, which is happening to me as of now as I hit my 30s. Therefore, a lot of teachers would try to set her up. So, she once said, "I'm married to my music and to God." The teachers murmured amongst themselves, but never brought up the hitching thing again, at least in front of us, the students. She had a strikingly comforting and warm smile, with a very pleasant voice and soft tone, but was a woman of few words, who mostly liked to mind her own business. She would spend the day sitting in the music room, practicing, or in between class, or at the piano in the auditorium. I did see her talk to other faculty members in a few instances, but she did not spend as much time with them as they did with one another. She rarely ever spoke, unless it was about the music classes or practices. She looked and dressed uniquely. She would wear this, a line skirt, all the way from above her waistline, always with a tucked-in full-sleeve shirt and a sleeveless overcoat. She would wear different variations of this attire every day. She also had very curly hair, cut to a bob, and wore a pair of glasses with thick black frames. There seemed to be absolutely nothing too striking or peculiar about her, just unique, since I come from a culture where most of our teachers wore traditional clothing and are pretty involved, too involved, with the students and school activities. She left the school when I was in 5th standard. We all bid her a warm welcome. I remember feeling quite sad, actually. It had been years since then. I was now living in another city altogether, going to my 2nd year of university, when one morning, I read a bizarre news article that was freshly breaking from my home city and gaining traction nationwide. It was one of the weirdest, most bizarre true crime/mysteries that I had ever read. As it happened in my hometown, I was obviously extra interested. A father had self-immolated in the bathroom of a very old house in a posh, quiet neighborhood of the city. The son was completely unaware and looked disturbed. Upon further investigation, police found 4 other dead bodies in the house, nicely nestled on a bed, in a room with fresh food served, incense burning, and music playing. Where the bodies had decomposed skeletal remains of the daughter/sister, with 2 other dogs on either side of hers. The windows and ventilations of the room were carefully boarded and blocked. The son/brother was called in for questioning. He had been living with the corpse for a very long time. Police soon discovered that the brother was mentally unstable, and there was way more to the story than they could ever fathom. They found out that the family did not speak to each other directly, but communicated only through chits, the messages on which were bizarre and eerie. The brother maintained a journal, which not only indicated towards his deteriorating mental health, but also revealed dark, dysfunctional, abusive, and incestuous family secrets, with possible hints of necrophilia and cult-like religious practices. It was a strangely tragic case, with a very deep and dark insight. What struck out to me personally was the name of the woman whose skeletal remains had been discovered. It sounded way too familiar. I searched up some more and found another article, this time with a photo of the deceased woman. To my utter shock, surprise, and disbelief, it was our first school music teacher. This was her dead body, the story of her residence and probably her life, which I had absolutely no idea about prior to this. Though most details of the case were never revealed, and there were all kinds of weird rumors about the case, I believe what little information was available. Mental health has its way with people. That is what makes this so sad. It was horrifying. For some reason, I felt terrible, terribly sad and depressed. She taught us such wonderful music, taught us so many wonderful songs, was such a wholesome person altogether, and this is how things ended for her? It seemed unbelievable almost. 2 years later, the brother also self-immolated. I often remember her sitting at the piano, smiling widely at my younger self, with a soft voice saying good. I just wish somebody could help her when there was time. I had gotten out of an 8-year abusive relationship and met someone on a popular online dating app. To be honest, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to go watch a movie or have a drink with every now and then. I had 2 boys and was happy and living a peaceful life on my own after going through hell. So I met this guy who was just a couple years older than me, and he had turned his life around. When he was younger, he used to be in gangs and drugs, and now he was into working out and staying really fit and doing family stuff. I guess you can say that I felt protected by him. He was a hard worker, self-sufficient, had a son, and he loved going to the gym every day. I myself had kind of a crazy past, but overcame, and so we seemed like a perfect fit. We would go to dinner, movies, normal dating stuff, but he eventually wanted to spend more and more time together, and I was having trouble giving up all my free time for him, and he would get very, very angry about this. After being with a controlling, possessive jerk for so long, this was obviously a red flag, and after 3 months, I told him I didn't want to see him anymore. He said that he needed to confess something to me. He admitted to me that he was using steroids, and that was the reason for his mood swings. He cried and said that he was sure that was the reason, and was willing to stop if it meant that he could have another chance, and I obliged, but only under the condition that we remain friends. Things were okay for a while. We saw each other maybe every other week, and he started wanting to see me every week, to which I told him that I was not interested in being anything other than friends at the moment, since I was not ready for a relationship. He tried talking me into giving him another chance, but I just didn't find myself interested in him in a romantic way, and so I insisted that we just be friends. I stopped talking to him because I got mad at his insistence that we still talk every day, since he said that's what friends do. He would always ask about my whereabouts, and ask for pictures of who I was hanging out with, and I told him that that is not what friends do, and he just insisted that he innocently wanted to see what I was up to. Fast forward 6 months later, and I hadn't spoken to him at all within that time. I was happy and living my life, and on one particular night, when my youngest son was at his dad's, I went out to a local bar with friends. My oldest son, who was 13 at the time, was home alone, so I left a little early to make it home at around 10 p.m. I lay down in bed and go to sleep. So, a little info on my living situation. I had been living in my condo for almost a year now, and we lived in a great, safe community, and I would leave my patio sliding glass door open with the screen closed to get a breeze in at night. No biggie. My bedroom was close to the patio, and my son would sleep in the loft that was closest to the front door. I'm dead asleep when I suddenly feel someone slowly sit on my bed. I'm laying in bed, wondering why my son would come sit on my bed so slowly. He wouldn't. I turn around and it's not him. It's Mario, not his real name, laying down in bed next to me. I sit up and ask him how he got in. He's not answering me. He says, "I needed to talk to you." I said, "Okay. When you need to talk to someone, you don't sneak into their room. You call them. You leave a note for them. Literally anything but this." I'm thinking I'm going to kill my kid for letting him in. He said, "I didn't have your number anymore. I needed to talk to you before it's too late." I didn't even entertain the "before it's too late" bit because I was livid, but something told me to keep my cool. I sit up and say, "Look, I really want to talk to you too, but not like this. Please just leave, and I promise we will talk tomorrow. Call me tomorrow." He gets up and walks over to my side of the bed and starts rubbing my shoulders and is slowly making his way to my neck. He says, "Do you really want to talk?" I look him in the eyes and say, "Yes, I've been wanting to talk to you, but not like this. Please call me tomorrow." He stares at me while rubbing my neck and goes down to my shoulders and lets go. Says, "Okay." This jerk proceeds to exit through my patio door and jumps my patio wall, which tells me that is exactly how he got in. I freak out, check on my kid. He had no idea what was going on, locked all my doors, and I don't sleep the rest of the night. The next day I text him and I tell him that if I ever see him near me or my complex, I will call the police and to never contact me again. If you're wondering why I didn't call the cops to begin with, I knew he had a gun. So A, I was scared of being retaliated against for being a snitch, and B, I figured if I called the cops, they would probably not do much, or just let him out, and I was afraid of what he would do after the fact. Either way, he left me alone, and I didn't hear from him for years. 4 years later, I'm looking through Facebook, and I see his face in the People You May Know section. I click on the picture and notice that it looks just like a jail picture. You know, those pictures where the guy is clearly in a jail cell. I scroll down the page, and his most recent post is him posting his address for his family members to write to. A prison address. So I Google his name, and sure enough, article after article, all with the same headline: Man arrested on suspicion of killing girlfriend. About 2 years after him and I dated, he shot and killed the girl that he was dating. That could have been me. And I feel like crap thinking if there was anything I could have done to stop him. Even scarier thought is that he only got 12 years for her murder. I'm not sure if I've been traumatized or if I'm just overreacting, but my mom's neighbor was murdered recently, and I'm really struggling to cope. The thing about this is I grew up in my mom's house for 18 years and moved back recently to an apartment 5 minutes away, so I'm over at her house often. I grew up with these neighbors and got somewhat strange vibes from all of them, but really liked one of them. The dad. He was always very kind and very likable. He and his wife had issues, and they had 4 kids, one of whom was mentally unstable and was living with her parents well into adulthood. I always got eerie vibes from her, but I always just chalked it up to a manageable dose of anger and severe mental illness. She had also gone through a severe trauma in her teen years that kind of explained the instability. Well, I showed up at my mom's house on a Thursday. The daughter was outside, appearing to have a full-on mental breakdown, laughing nonstop and talking to herself quickly and strangely in between laughs. It seemed like she never even paused for a breath. I was afraid, I won't lie, but I knew another neighbor had called the police, so I thought that it was going to be handled. I will never forget the look on her face though. She had been laughing all day long for hours on end, and her face had changed a strange color of bright red and orange. At one point, she was laughing and talking to herself while looking directly at me. By the end of the evening, she was inside, and the house was quiet, and I stupidly assumed in her state that it had somewhat lessened. You would think I would know how bad it was, and how dangerous she was from the description. But if it's someone you know, or even just see regularly, somehow you just don't consider that they can be as dangerous as what you hear on true crime podcasts. The next day, police and ambulance came and taped off the house. I assumed that it was a self-unaliving at first, and I was only a little surprised. Then we found out that she had murdered her father. He was a sickly and frail older man who had been taking care of her alone out of compassion. The photo of her crazed mugshot with scratch marks on her face from him fighting for his life. The image of seeing the two of them together, seemingly happy and normal. The image of her red and orange face. And the idea of his horrific last moments haunt me. I can't process it, I can't find a lot of info about a neighbor being murdered, and I don't know if I'm just overreacting or if this was trauma. The creepy guy that I dated is a murderer. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. I met Mr. Creep there. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion. It made me feel safe. One night I was leaving work, and had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try and open it. I looked into his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled me to my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil that I saw. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him that I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied to try to impress me and tried to invent ways of being alone with me. But my instinct was to run, so I avoided him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I sent all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes that it would help. Mr. Creep slithered away after that, but I always looked over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance, as well as a huge acreage that he owned. It made me nervous, and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. Then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges, as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I am so glad to know that he's locked up, but so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts about Mr. Creep were. I feel like I escaped him, and thank you for reading. So today has been a particularly slow day at work, and I've been killing time reading these stories. Maybe enough time has passed and I can share mine. I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned on to it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt a conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on the PlayStation. Sometimes we'd go see movies, with my boyfriend accompanying us. We all hung out at the park. We went swimming. Overall, we had a good time hanging out. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself, apparently a pretty easy thing to do after a meager amount of research, and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself don't exist anymore. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once, in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of different things there. Imagine what it does to a person when they're smoking it 30 plus times in a day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said that he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently, he had long hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he wasn't smoking the DMT. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this, and I told him that he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months, so he can find solid footing in reality again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help. And like I said before, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk him into getting some psychiatric help, because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously, since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she is at least 6 years younger than us, and probably didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend in the park. I didn't really want to go, because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad, and we went away. We get to the park, and he is his usual self, ranting about Egypt and making up gods that only he knew the truth about. He also had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic, and that it helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me or my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know how or what to say to or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept going on with this ritual. Keep in mind, we were walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and then drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though that I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, why do you think that I want to spend any more time with this guy?" But it must have not been very effective, or my boyfriend was ignoring it. I'm not sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. In the car, I was driving. My boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through a busy part of town, where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I hear the worst sound imaginable. I peek out the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. This guy was doing stuff in our back seat. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach, and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped up in my head. I was trying not to shake and trying to ignore it and drive through heavy traffic. I kind of had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge knife that he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off of his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. This part is nuts. My boyfriend didn't even seem to notice, and the whole time he kept rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving, and trying to act like I didn't know what was going on in my back seat. We get to the restaurant, and my boyfriend runs inside to grab food. I'm left alone in the car with our friend, and I try to act like I'm browsing on my phone, when really, I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back, and I explain that I'm tired. It's been a long day. Let's just drop him off, etc. So I drive us back to our friend's car, and he doesn't get out of our vehicle. He just sits there. I have to get a little bit rude and ask him to please get out and go home. He gets out of our car and walks over to his passenger side. I start getting really scared and suspected the worst. He pulled out a gun of some kind that he had on the seat, and he just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why I did this, but I was so angry that I just got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and I could see that it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we are never hanging out with him again, and that I didn't even want him to talk to him anymore. No contact. Nada. A few months pass and he occasionally messages me through the PlayStation or texts my phone. He says a lot of random stuff and I just ignore it. It turns out he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate, and I think their girlfriend lived there. I'm not really sure about the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I think it's best to cut all contact and let him regroup. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know that he needed help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister to let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I get a call at around 11 p.m. one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming that he's a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. This whole thing turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal, and I'm kind of feeling sick after writing all of this. To give a little context, I used to work at an apartment complex. As a result, I've had my fair share of creepy encounters. Most residents keep to themselves and don't cause issues, probably about 95%. But the other 5% took up almost all of my time. Isaac was one of the 5%. When he first rented his apartment, he definitely had stoner vibes, but he was nice enough and passed his background check. Almost immediately, however, he started causing issues. The lady next door complained that she could smell his smoke constantly. The guy downstairs complained he could hear his stereo at all hours of the day and night. Another resident accused him of following him home one night. The police were regularly there, breaking up fights between him and his girlfriends. We caught him hiding 2 large dogs in his apartment, and he regularly let them run loose, which ultimately resulted in another dog and 2 people getting attacked. He accidentally discharged a gun in his apartment once. Needless to say, he caused a lot of issues. At first, he was very apologetic, and he would make an effort to remedy the problems. But things kept getting worse. and after a year of weekly calls or notices from the office, he eventually became standoffish. One morning, I received a call from Isaac letting me know that he'd broken up with one of his girls, and she wouldn't leave the apartment. He asked me to personally come up and remove her. I'm a small woman, so even if I wanted to take the risk, I physically wouldn't be capable of wrestling an angry woman out of his apartment. I suggested he call the police. He then asked if I could make a maintenance man come up to remove her. I offered to call the police on his behalf, but Isaac said he didn't want to involve them and hung up. A few hours later, Isaac came down to the office with a jump drive and said that he needed to print out a 50-plus page document. Residents weren't technically allowed to use our office printer, but on the rare occasion that someone asked to, I usually didn't say no. It was an easy way to build good rapport. But between Isaac becoming such a problem tenant and now how large his document was, I told him that I couldn't print his document. I gave the excuse that our printer and toner and paper was out, and that we would get in trouble for printing such a large document out for him anyways. Not liking my answer, he started screaming about how it was BS. He accused me of being useless, bringing up my refusal to fight his ex, and power tripping. He called me a B-word multiple times, and said someone needed to bring me down a peg. I was pretty over him at this point, and told him that if he was going to behave like a child, that he needed to leave. He told me that I couldn't make him. Bluntly, I told him that he would leave or I would call the police and have him removed. I also told him that I would ban him from the office going forward. Normally, I tried to kill the residents with kindness, but his lease was ending in a week, and I didn't care anymore if he hated me. My threat seemed to work. He angrily knocked my pen holder over, and then slammed both doors hard as he left. The following morning, a cop was waiting for me when I got to work. He asked if Isaac was a resident, and I confirmed that he was. The officer explained that a body of a teen had been discovered the day before, and Isaac was their prime suspect. He was the last person to text the kid asking them to meet somewhere, where his body was found shortly after the message. The police believed Isaac had been paid to kill him. Based on the timing of the text and when the boy was discovered, Isaac would have had to have left my office and gone directly there. Ultimately, the police wanted to use Isaac's move-out day as an opportunity to try and catch him. To nobody's surprise, he did not show up. When I walked his apartment to inspect for damage, there was a lot. I found a bank receipt from the day of the murder. Someone had wired him $17,000. Thankfully, I never saw Isaac again. He was caught in another country a few months later, and is now in prison. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you have an excellent night's sleep, and I hope that you enjoy the rain sounds at the end. Get an excellent night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.